This is AfterWords, the second session of Believers, Nonbelievers, session 2, which was the role and limits of faith. I was on the panel along with a gentleman named Hughes. I'm drawing a blank on his first name, I apologize, against Jay and Ian Diorio, who's a pastor at Ukaipa Christian Church. So his proxy is going to be graciously, thank you very much, Kelly, sitting in his place. We talked a little bit about what he feels comfortable with talking about and his expertise to do some of the stuff that Jay went over. He doesn't necessarily agree with Ian. I don't want to beat up on Ian. Ian's not here to defend himself. The videos, I think it's rather entertaining. I stand by everything I said. So it's worth watching if you're interested. If you care enough to be watching this, you probably should have watched that first. Fair enough? So, I mean, I'll start out. I don't know if you had any, just off your top of your head, memories from what Ian said that you wanted to go over, because you said you had some issues there.
Well, I think Ian's point of view, and again, I'm not saying that he doesn't believe there isn't a child of God, but I'm just, from his perspective is different than mine, at least from what I could gather from the conversation. He's more in the philosophical realm. He mentioned a couple times that he's not really what he called an evidentialist. That's completely me. I'm completely an evidentialist. I don't mind the philosophy part as well. You have to bring in a little bit of philosophy to understand things that are in the distant past. But to dismiss evidence is just not me. So that's one of the issues that I had that he kept saying a couple times. The other one was he mentioned something about fundamentalists. You guys probably know this, that have seen this a couple times. I am a fundamentalist. That's me. And he had some, I don't know, disparaging, just he wasn't sure that fundamentalism, as defined, was a good path to take. What fundamentalism means, I don't know. What I take it as is what the document says, and I believe it. If that's a fundamentalist, then that's what I am. But he seemed to have some issues with that. Did you gather that from him as well? Did you gather that during the conversation?
Slightly. You said he was dismissive of evidence.
He said he was an evidentialist.
To his defense, I don't think he would say he dismisses evidence. I think he was trying to frame it properly in his understanding of his worldview. I don't think he's saying we can just ignore all the evidence.
Yeah, that was probably
more hyperbolic,
maybe over-descriptive.
Yeah.
But he said he wasn't an evidentialist. Does that mean he's not any of it? No.
Well, we can only speculate.
He doesn't get into it. Let's put it that way. Whereas I do.
I specifically remember him saying that it's important to bring arguments and reason as opposed to just saying we can point to this historical event or not that historical event, something along those lines. So I wrote a review. It was less than I originally typed out in the first place. So just to kind of hit some of the highlights of that point, those points that I made. The first thing we went through as I tried desperately to preclude this from happening was the definitions, specifically of the word faith. It's in the video, it's well articulated there, but I was using a dictionary definition. Phil brought a dictionary definition. I brought a poster for it, and my partner was on board, and both Jay and Ian changed the definition. I was saying something along the lines of religious belief without evidence, or just a synonym for religion or a synonym for trust, depending on the context, depending on how you use it. And I proposed that we don't use the word faith when you mean trust. I don't use the word faith when I mean religion, just because it muddies the water. If you in this context, let's just use the word faith if you mean religious belief without evidence. And then on the volley, Ian and Jay both changed it. Ian's was belief beyond evidence, and Jay said faith is trust in action, I think is what he said. So we right from the get-go, we weren't talking about the same thing at the same time, the same way. We never really agreed on terms to begin with. So we tried to bring it back to home once or twice, and it never really seemed to settle down. So that was a little.
Let me just interject.
Sure.
I liked your definition.
Thank you.
I thought it was an excellent one.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it because it's, to me, the first century idea of that word faith is more towards what you said, trust. And it's trusting in what you see and trusting in what you could evaluate. And at this point in our society, faith has become, tooth fairies and Santa Claus. In some circles, that's what that word has came to, and I kind of liked your definition. I thought it was good.
Well, thank you.
So I agreed with you on that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important, crucial elements of this discussion was what Ian said very appropriately, was that those two, I don't mean chest poking, I say the other two fellows, they were using faith and trust on a synonym, on a spectrum, as different degrees. Jay said degrees and Ian said a spectrum. So it's simply a matter of how much confidence you have, how much trust you have, how much evidence you're willing to accept as credible for one claim or one source. They see it as a spectrum, and I see them as completely separate sets. And I think that's the worldview. That's the difference between where they were coming from and where we were coming from, is I see religious belief without evidence, and I see trust or knowledge as completely separate. You know, Venn diagrams are big circles. This one fits over here. It doesn't fit over here. If you're doing one, I see them as mutually exclusive. You're either trusting, you either have knowledge or you have faith. They were saying they see it as on a spectrum, and that was the hurdle that we could never get over in the first place. Does that ring a bell?
Okay, so maybe that explains it better to me what you were getting at. 'Cause maybe I misunderstood. As I said, there's people that your spectrum of religious belief without evidence, and then the other side. I don't, and this is a conversation that me and Phil had with a friend of mine, Keith. It's not. I don't see it as monolithic. The idea that the science, I call it scientism, has this corner on truth, for example, and that's where you get trust from. If that's what you're getting at, tell me if I'm wrong. That's where you get your trust from. And this religious stuff, well, that's just kind of like believing in stuff that may have been written a long time ago that really doesn't have much impact in our lives today. I don't see it that way. I see that there's reasons for people to believe, me anyway. That's how I am, and they're what's the best word for it? I wouldn't say concrete, but significant reasons to believe. And those are ones that are, I guess you would have to call it more in the philosophical realm, because unfortunately none of us can travel back and see what happened then. There was no evidence, no eyewitnesses. In my opinion, there was one. You may not agree. There was one eyewitness that gave his account. But realistically, asking people today, anyone, be it in science or what you guys call religion or faith-based, they're giving their opinion on what happened. And none of them were there to see it. All they can do is examine what's now, to see if and what's in history books and the like, see if the documentation for a book called the Bible, whether it's really true or not, whether any of those documents and those stories are actual accounts by people at the time. So those type of things, I don't know whether that's exactly what you're getting at, Eric, but is that the idea of the trust and? Well, let me see if because I'm not saying that you're not right about some places. Okay, let me pick on a little bit of faith systems here. If you want to start in critical analysis of Mormonism, I would join you. If you wanted to do it, it's fun. Okay, if you want to do a critical analysis of Islam, I would join you.
I've done it, it's fun.
Okay. There's lots of them in Jehovah's Witnesses, I would join you, because those things are not, they don't have any substance to them. They fall apart as soon as you start examining them. I believe that Christianity and Judaism, by inclusion, are not that way. I believe they have a rich history, documentation of their belief systems, a historic backup for the things that are said. I think it's in a different ballpark. Okay, so that's a separate apologetic about other faiths and how presuppositions that go into those and documentation levels, and we can talk about the Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrine and Covenants and the documentation that goes along with the traveling of Brigham Young across the country in Jackson, Mississippi, Missouri, and so forth. We can talk about all that, but just back to the topic of the discussion was faith and trust. Let's just say, if I can try to simplify this as best I can, there's two camps, and I'm going to ask you to put yourself in one of the other, if you're able, okay? This camp over here says that faith and trust. Do I get a motorhome in either one of these? Because I'm not into tents.
We'll give you a speedboat if you want.
Okay, that'd be great. Just a fishing boat would be fine.
Is simply a matter of degree, okay? I either say I believe something more or I know something more or my level of confidence is higher or lower, and it simply falls somewhere on this spectrum, okay? And over here, somebody says, well, if I say I know something, I'm saying I'm willing to say that I know it definitively, 100%, as much as we can know something, independent of solipsism, which is something I really want to do with Ian. But I can know something as best I possibly can and say my confidence is as high as it possibly can be. Or I'm saying faith, I believe it without it's religious belief without evidence. Okay. Would you put yourself in either of one of these two sides? You're either somebody who says it's separate sets, or you're somebody who says it's a spectrum.
Oh boy. As I said, I'm a Thomas, so I would put myself more towards the knowing it side.
Okay, so they're separate sets. Okay, so there's common ground. We agree, because I see them as separate sets too. And I think that the biggest point about, to go back to the video specifically, was I wanted to ask them, and I didn't, just for time constraints, I didn't get a chance to, is if it is a spectrum, and this is the paradigm that we're operating on, that it is a spectrum, which is what they were advocating for, and it's not definitive one way or the other, separate sets, what is their word for belief without evidence, in the complete absence of evidence? And I can't ask you to speculate on what there would be, because you and I agree that they're separate sets. So back to the video, if anybody cares to dig that deep into them and research it, that was something I felt that was left unsaid, and it would have been a good point to make at the time.
Let me give you an idea of what I think, at least some people that aren't into the evidential side like me. Let me try to give you what I hear from some of them. They're in communication with God. Now that may sound funny, but God says in his word that he will communicate with you if you'll listen. He says he's listening, and he's there. And there's people that have time and meditate and seek, and they speak with God, and that's just as valid as my search for evidence. It's just as valid. It may not be as provable as what mine is, but it's just as real for them. And until you have sat down quietly and tried to communicate with him, you can't really understand that. And I'm not saying that it's not because intelligence or whatever, it's not that. It's just that approach is different. It's someone's approach that is searching. Maybe they've had a tragic event like what I had. And I'm not saying I didn't do that, because I did. At the tragic event at first, I was fully open to him speaking to me. I didn't know who he was at that point. I had no idea, because I didn't know, but I was willing to listen. I was open. I was listening. So I'm not saying that I'm excluded from that. It's just that's part of it. Maybe like you're trying to say, maybe that was 30% of it and evidence was 70. I'm just guessing those numbers out of the sky. But there are people that are like that. They don't really care about the stuff that I talk about. I bore them silly. Talk to them sometimes. I say, why do you even get into that stuff? It's silly. Well, it's me. So there, if I'm saying this right, if I'm gathering what you're asking me, there's lots of people that are more into the communication side of being in God's kingdom and being connection with him. If you ask them what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, they'd say, what are you talking about? That's just me. And there's people that aren't like that. So there's different sides to the faith question.
I saw him in March of last year down in L.A. I got pictures on my phone.
You really? Yeah.
If you want to see him,
cool.
I'll send them to you if you want them.
I've been to Israel to see him, so
that's cool.
It's really a very.
So you made a lot of assertions and a lot of statements and a lot of presuppositionalisms about this is God's kingdom and he'll speak to you, and a lot of that depends on God existing in the first place, and you have to believe that in the first place.
But that was your question to me, is that where those people stand on the line. So that's. If you're asking me where people that believe in God stand, then that's a presupposition, is that they believe in God.
Well, I don't know if I use the word God, but fair enough.
Okay.
You talk about other people's claims and other people's ideas, and Jay specifically, and you want to talk more about what Jay said than what Ian said, to be fair. Mm-hmm. Jay mentioned a lot about cognitive bias, right?
Yes.
And you live in a Christian culture. You live in the Western society, in modern Western society, right? Mm-hmm. So the arguments you make, the stories you retell, the anecdotes you give are framed in that context, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you've heard very convincing people that are very convinced of their own ideas from opposite cultures, say Hinduism or some Eastern culture, right, that are just as convinced and feel they have just as much evidence. Now, when Jay, just to relay this to the conversation, mm-hmm. Jay specifically mentions cognitive bias and how it relates to how we ascertain our worldviews, right? Mm-hmm. Do you see the Hindus as using cognitive bias when they say Lord Brahma vomited on his chest and that universe is Vishnu and Lord Shiva someday will come destroy it? Are they using cognitive bias when they read the Vedas and they say this is accurate, but you're not using cognitive bias when you look at the Hebrew scriptures and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament and so forth? Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I evaluate things. I'm not super smart. I'm not. I get horrible grades in school, so don't get that idea about me. But I can evaluate things. God did make it so I can read. I can read things and I can evaluate things, and I believe God's gave me that ability. But when I look at, you mentioned Hinduism, okay? So let's look at that, and I have. It doesn't sound like I've quite as much examination as you've had, because you mentioned some stuff that I vaguely remember.
I'm just trying to browbeat.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. What I do know about Hinduism is that the God that they portray is inside the universe. And when I started looking into things like that, and I looked at it from a Christian perspective, you're right. So I had that bias that you're talking about. But I also evaluated what their claim was. Their claim is that God's inside the universe. God's in everything. You know, there's like thousands and thousands of gods in the universe, but they're all inside this universe. And once 1930 came around and they realized the universe had a beginning, that idea of God being inside the universe just doesn't pan out
Not
logically.
tenable anymore.
It's not tenable
Well,
anymore.
it's not a world religions class 101, but there's obviously
There's not, but it's not tenable.
There's-
it's
well-
not. You
well,
can't go
zoom out.
into. Okay.
zoom out.
Yeah.
I'm back
Okay.
10 seconds ago.
All right.
There's, like you talk about monolith, Hinduism is far from monolith. There's thousands of
Sure, there's lots of them. Yeah, but they're all
and when
inside
you-
the universe.
Well, no, they're not specifically, because Brahma is the creator. They have an ex nihilo claim as well. Okay,
Yeah.
Brahma is the creator amongst certain sects. There's all different kinds of sects.
Okay.
right?
All
Just
right.
like Jehovah's
I'm not
Witnesses.
familiar with that one.
Well, specifically, Brahma threw up the universe on his chest, created it out of nothing from inside himself, and vomited on his chest. And this universe that we live in, they call Vishnu. There's different avatars of it all around. That's what you're talking about: pantheism versus panentheism. The universe is God is everything in the universe, but at the same time, similar to almost a trinity, Lord Brahma threw up the universe and created it ex nihilo on himself. So there's different, and they don't all accept that one version. And I'm not qualified to teach that stuff. Just a little bit of reading that I've done. So it's not specifically.
Is there something that's in there? Because this is what I've read, and again, you can tell from what his name is, the guy that I'm not going to talk about anymore. I get things from the internet, and they're not always right. But is there an idea of that God being inside the universe? Because that's what I've read.
That's pantheism.
Okay, is
Yeah,
that what Hindus?
Pantheism is there are multiple gods. Panentheism is God is everything. He is in every inanimate object and every.
That's what I'm
inanimate
getting
object.
at.
Yeah, there's a difference in the two,
Okay.
and they both are encompassed in the different ideas.
And the whole reincarnation thing, you live this life to get better, and then you die, and if you're not good enough, then you live another one.
Sounds a
to
lot
get
like
better.
Christianity.
No, actually, you got one shot at it with Christianity. That's it. This is the only shot you got.
Well, but it's a testing ground, right?
Yeah, but the testing ground isn't.
But there's
anything.
life after death, which is reincarnation.
Not here.
Not on this planet, but it's still a different life after the cessation of life.
The idea behind Hindu and Christian reincarnation is here. You come in as a human.
Fair,
and
but it's
then
life
you
after
get
death.
reincarnated
Yeah.
as.
I mean, we're splitting hairs, but
Depending on, you start off as a dog, and if you're good enough, you get to be a cat, depending on which one you like, cats or dogs. But that kind of progression type thing is you getting good enough to make it. That's completely the opposite of Christianity. 100%. You're not good enough. Now, you weren't good enough before you came to faith. You're not good enough now, nor will you ever be good enough. Ever. At any point will you be good enough.
There's clearly
get there.
There's clearly a lot of
that's-
spikes to the tenets of.
Well,
yeah.
that's the difference between Christianity and any of them, even Judaism. You're never going to be good enough. And that's in my book, that's where Hinduism falls apart. Example, I gave you guys the change that I had when I was a legalist. Well, if it was Hinduism that I was involved in, that's exactly what they tell me to do. I have to get good enough. And I know me well enough to know I'm not ever going to be good enough. So in Hinduism wouldn't give me that example. Hinduism wouldn't have given me that chance that Christianity gives me. Because Christianity says I know you're not good enough. That's the whole
Well,
point.
not to
I'm good enough, and I've taken away that thing that you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Not to be
so
rude.
that's my thought pattern on Hinduism. That's
Fair.
the reason why I don't do it. That's the cognitive
Dissidence.
that I have for Hinduism.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go on to something else Jay said that I think is a little bit more in your wheelhouse.
Okay.
He talked a lot about probabilities.
Yes.
I think you like this subject.
I do.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of what Jay said.
Okay.
He said
I didn't do Jay's research, but I trust him
sounds
to do it
it
because
sounds
he's
a
good.
little bit like you.
Yeah.
A little bit like your
Okay.
your favorite shtick there. Shtick, please. I did not use a curse word. The probability you talk about the 400 proteins and the amino acids and they're all left-handed,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and he used the coin flip. I don't know if you used that in part of your,
I did.
part of your apologetics.
Yeah.
Yeah, use the coin flip. Do you want to quickly give me a little bit of that to
Okay.
say?
I think I asked that question actually of Hughes, and I can't remember his
I
first name
thought
either.
you Brad. It was Brad.
Brad,
Yeah,
okay,
I thought
Brad.
you asked something about proteins and orientations. and
I did.
Abiogenesis stuff.
Right, and it was in response to Brad's statement that he could explain from a scientific standpoint, he could explain anything that needed to be explained, and of course he can't. So my point was the makeup of proteins, and for that matter, nucleic
Specifically
acids.
the probabilities and
Right, probabilities. So
yeah.
from this pool, and let's assume from the naturalistic point of view, you somehow or another come about the amino acids in a pool. I'll tell you what, I'll give you that. And the amino acids are produced in right and left-handed versions. And they bind just as equally and just as easily to left-handed or right-handed. So you've got this pool of amino acids that have no direction allowed, and they're sitting in the pool. Now you're going to be lining up these things for, let's go first base, let's go to RNA and DNA, which is only right-handed amino acids. So you have to line those up into, I don't know what the amount of amino acids are in RNA and DNA, but it's a long string. You only have to have right-handed ones, and there has to be a selection process to get that. And from a naturalistic point of view, I just don't understand where the selection process comes into play. Because since they can bind just as easily to right-handed or left-handed, that happens just as easily. Why is it that these long strings, let's take the proteins for example, I said 2,000, Brad said 1,000. Okay, let's assume the lower amount, 1,000. There's 1,000 of these amino acids lined up and joined together in a certain pattern. It's very key for a pattern. But let's just keep to the left-handed part. There's 1,000 of these lined up in line with only left-handed ones. So you're getting these selection process going on from this pool of amino acids that are both right and left-handed, but only the left-handed ones are getting chosen and put into the line. So this is the evaluation that you come to. This is flipping a coin, heads and tails, and you're coming up with heads at the minimum that Brad said. I think it's 2,000, but let's just assume 1,000 times in a row. You're tossing the coin, and you're coming. This is a random illustration. You're tossing the coin, and you're coming up with heads 1,000 times in a row.
Okay.
No, as soon as you get a tail, that represents a right-handed amino acid, and the whole thing is now junk. It can't be life because there's only left-handed ones involved in proteins. As soon as you get a right-handed one, it's all deadly to life.
Okay. So you said a lot there.
Yeah.
And
If you let me talk, I'll blab.
I'm trying to
Okay,
shut you
all
up. Yeah, you're good at your spiel here.
Yeah.
Now, specifically when we're talking about the probabilities and how rare an event that could be and what the probability of what that would be, I think a point that was made by Brad in the conversation that was talked over a little bit, it was missed, is something that's always missed out on these discussions about 400 strands or 800 strands or 2,000 strands. The numbers, let's just concede the numbers are way beyond anything that could fit on a standard calculator, okay? You can take a deck of cards and you can pull out one card and you can put it face up and you say, oh my gosh, there's the whatever of whatever suit, right? And you say that was a 1 in 52 chance, right? And you can take the next deck of cards and you can say, oh, let's pull out one card and there's the whatever of whatever suit, right? And you can do that until the cows come home all day long. And you can say, wow, the odds of getting these specific cards were so astronomical because it's times 52 times 52, but it's actually cubed because it's a different card for every deck every single time, and it grows exponentially very, very rapidly. You start throwing 4 or 5 cards up here, and the numbers are going to be, throw 4 or 5 decks, the numbers are going to blow your mind. They're probably higher than we're talking about your proteins and your so forth and so. The problem is these arguments always, and Brad actually mentioned this, was these discussions always do it retroactively. We look at how this event took place, and we look at the probability of the event, and we're saying it after the fact, because the odds of getting all ace of spades, or getting an ace of spades and a queen of spades, and a different one, whatever that is, whatever that sequence is, the probability is the same amongst all the decks of cards, one card being pulled out amongst all the decks of cards. The probability is the same if it's all jokers or all aces of spades or whatever it is, even if they're all completely different random cards. The probability is 1 in 8 trillion or whatever the case may be. The problem is we're looking at it after the fact. And that's what we're doing with these processes of the coin flip and the proteins and the amino acids. It's all taking place after the fact. Okay, so first of all, that's the first point. And I'll let you jump in on that.
Well,
the second point that you jumped over is what we're missing out on is this universe we're living, this planet that we're living in suits us very well. Please, suits us very well. There just happens to be 79% oxygen, 79% nitrogen, and 20% oxygen. Surprise, surprise, that's just the perfect combination that we need. Now, we can look at that and we can interpret that and we can say, oh, look, someone must have turned the dial of nitrogen and oxygen,
monkeyed with the settings.
Exactly. Somebody turned the knobs to set gravity at 1G, to set oxygen, nitrogen, and all the rare earth elements in the atmosphere, just so that we can breathe. Or you can say a funnel is a pyramid if it's sitting like this, or you can turn it upside down and say, oh, things fall in the funnel. Things only fit in the funnel. If it couldn't breathe 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen, it wouldn't be alive right now. So the only things that are alive, you see what I'm saying, is when you look at it before or after the fact, if you're trying to assign agency, and this is something that was addressed in the first subject, is our brains are manic pattern-seeking devices that are constantly looking for patterns and trying to assign agency. It's very uncomfortable for us to not know something that was caused or created. We have to think of things that was caused or created. So we're constantly assigning agency to these things. So it's very easy for us to say, oh yeah, somebody must have set the dial for gravity, for the earth to form, for gravity, for amino acids, for proteins. Somebody must have set these things up. But in reality, if you flip a coin 400 times, yeah, it's going to be completely random. But if you flip a coin next to a giant magnet and the head is magnetized, the head side is magnetized, and the tails is not, it's going to end up with the head side facing the magnet more often than not, depending on polarity, north and south, right? So if there's natural forces, i.e. a canyon, right, a valley like a funnel, the river's at the bottom of the canyon, the river's at the bottom of the valley, right? Every single time. Well, human beings are at the bottom of the funnel in this valley of life, in this valley of Earth. The Earth is what it is. It's we have to be able to say, it's okay to say it is what it is. That's just the way that it became. Because if your version of a God exists, he could have made us able to breathe liquid mercury. We could be having this conversation on the moon of Jupiter right now, right? There's nothing outside of his capability. However, we just so happen to perfectly fit in the environment that we live. That doesn't strike you as odd?
You talked about agency and after the fact. Let me address some of that.
Sure.
So, I think agency is exactly what we're getting at.
Assigning agency.
Well,
erroneously or accurately, because the Hindus assign agency differently.
Okay.
And they're very convinced as well. And they've got great arguments and really good apologetics and and gurus and yogis, and I'll stop.
It's not the subject matter, but
sure.
I would lean towards that as opposed to leaning as some sort of agent. The throw up thing doesn't make, it's kind of gross, but.
I didn't invent it.
Okay.
I didn't even know it was real. I wasn't here.
I would lean towards that as opposed to just saying, well, life is here because it's here. And things are this way because, well, life's here.
Well, I mean,
that's you're directing things though, but from, and I'll get to that too. You're directing things from how can you look at it from, if you're trying to figure out what origins caused it, how can you look at it from the other side? If you're looking at it from the other side and about the human thing at the bottom, of course, I don't agree with that. But if you're trying to look at it from the other side and saying, well, it all lined up because it had to, because we're here. Well, that's kind of an after the fact argument. That's not looking for the cause. Cause and effect. Cause and effect, you're here because your mom and dad brought you here. And
in a manner of speaking.
Well, whoever that was.
In a poetic sense.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, what are you calling me? What are you
just
calling
even,
you?
even physically. Just physically. You're here because your mom and dad brought you here. I'm the same. My mom and dad brought me here. And cause and effect is that way. And if you have a fire in the local mountains, once they put the fire out, they're going to try to figure out what started it. And here's another the idea of looking for things that are after the fact and trying to explain it. Trying to have things that are in existence, saying, well, it had to be that way because we're here. And if that's what you're getting at, I don't know what I am. Tell me if I'm making a mistake there.
Before we get too deep down
Yeah.
this rabbit hole, and I see a question
Okay.
real quick. Just for sake of reference, we talk about big numbers and things that are meant to impress people with
Right.
mathematics. If we look at all the atoms in the universe, okay, the total number of atoms that are currently being used, so far as we can tell, and it's a very small segment of the universe we can look at, is less than 1 in 10 to the 5 billionth of the atoms in the universe are currently being used as organic mass on this planet. So if this universe was set up for life, wouldn't we see life on every planet? Wouldn't we see life everywhere? We just happen to see life on this one planet where it just happens to be one gravity, which is what our skeletons can hold in this atmosphere. It just happens to be in what they call the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, around a medium-sized star on only part of its surface, on only part of its time, right? Because humans didn't live in the Arctic for a very, very long period of time. They haven't lived in the ocean for a very, very long period of time. I understand you're a 6,000-year Earth guy, and that's fine. But I'm talking about from a secular scientific perspective. Humans only live in the very, very small, and if you can think about it metaphorically, a valley, we live in the valley. The one little tiny spot of this universe that can support life as we know it supports life.
Sure.
Right?
And we haven't found it anywhere else.
So far, I agree with you.
So far.
Yeah. As life as we know it. But it could exist in several different forms as well. Do you want to get to the question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Thanks. It seems to me a lot of the argument, a lot of your argument, Kelly, has to do with if a chance is so small, then it can't be possible. Can you explain to me why some chance, no matter how small, as long as it's a non-zero number, why that's less likely than your God?
Okay, you plugged in God there, but I understand. Well, once the numbers get to the numbers that Phil mentioned last time, Fred Hoyle's calculation from the first cell to human beings, I just find that not to be a very viable conclusion to draw. At 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power, so that Fred Hoyle, who's an atheist, described the chances are from the first cell to humans.
But that's not my question. My question is, why is a non-zero number, no matter how small, less likely than your God?
Because
I don't care how small it is. It could be 1 to the minus 12 gazillionth.
Because I base my life on probability, not possibility.
Why is a 1 to the minus 12 gazillion less probable than your God?
Okay, let me put it in another context.
Why is God
it sounds like
not a zero probability?
You're trying to solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. Yes? Isn't that kind of what you're saying? You're trying to solve a small problem, or you're saying Kelly is trying to solve a problem that has a very, very low probability by using something that has a much, much lower probability. Well, symmetrically, it doesn't work out.
You're suggesting the probability for a God is smaller than 1 to the 12 gazillionth. I'm just making up numbers. I'm saying he's using a zero number as larger than zero. And I don't know why he's doing that.
I base my life on probability, not possibility. I don't.
Okay.
What's
the mathematical probability of your God then? You're saying that there's more probability. How did you calculate that?
If Hoyle's saying that the probability of the first cell to humans is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th,
what did he calculate the possibility of God is then?
Let me finish. By the random process.
No, I've let you 3 times now. How did you calculate the possibility of your God?
I go by the opposite number. If he says chance has this 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power of making that happen, then the opposite is directed. And let me give you an example of why I base my life on probability, not possibility. If there's a race,
I don't think you understand my question, because you're answering something different.
No, you're asking me about probability and mathematics.
And I'm talking about, and you're talking about a calculated probability I'm asking you how you calculated the probability of your God. Can you show the math? You're saying Hoyle
I'm not a
did.
mathematician. I'm just going by what Hoyle said as far
Hoyle
as the other side.
Hoyle didn't give a probability for God.
No, he didn't.
So why are you saying, just now you said he did? You said I'm going by his calculation.
No, I'm saying that there's an opposite probability. If that chance is 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th, then I think he's saying that it's more directed. Directed is more likely.
Okay, so you're assuming then that whatever you think of is the opposite of that 10 to the minus 143rd or whatever?
Okay, Scott, I'll agree with you. I'm making an assumption.
Okay.
I'm making an assumption that based on the fact that that chance is what Hoyle came up with, then the chance of direction is the opposite. And I'll have to read on that.
But that's not mathematically reasonable.
Well, I'll have to read on it because I think
Okay,
it is.
if
you're calculating the random chance percentage that high, then the directed chance percentage, again, I'll have to read up on it because I don't want to make that mistake like Phil. I don't want to get beat up with talkings again. So let me read on it. But my assumption is that when you go away from the randomness that he's talking about, the guided chance is better.
Okay.
Let me find that out. Good question.
Okay, so let me ask you then.
Mark that on the tape.
If the chance of me running into a police car on the way home is 1 times 10 to the minus 12th, does that mean that my running into an ambulance is the opposite of that?
No, because you're still doing the same thing.
But you're suggesting that whatever you make up is the opposite chance.
No, I'm just comparing the chance.
No, you did. That's what you said.
From what Hoyle said was the randomness has this chance. And
you're just jumping to a conclusion that what you thought of is the opposite level of chance.
The alternative.
The one alternative. Your alternative.
Okay, you give me another option other than random or directed.
There are lots of other random possibilities.
No, that's random. Tell me a possibility other than random or directed. It's one of the
How
other.
about it was a giant cockroach? That's my imagination.
I don't know. I wouldn't really want to
But
be around
you're
a
talking
giant
about
cockroach.
calculated probabilities.
From the movies that I've seen of giant cockroaches, they're not very friendly. If any of you have seen, what's the name of that movie?
You're
that
talking
had the
about a
giant
calculated
cockroach in it?
probability.
Well, no, Scott, I'm
for
just
what
going
Hoyle-
by. Tell me what the opposites are of random or another option of random or directed. Hoyle gave the possibilities of randomness, and the number's astronomical.
Astronomically small, yes.
Right, and then directed. So there's only two possibilities.
No.
If this one's so bad on the random side, well, give me the other one between random and directed. Give me another
You're making
option.
up definitions for the mathematical issues.
Well, it's not what I asked. I said there's either random or directed.
You're
One of
making
the
that
two.
up. That's not.
And directed.
That's
don't,
not the
Don't
math.
get the idea that it's I'm trying to push Jesus on you. I'm talking about directed or random, and give me another option between the two, because that's what Hoyle is talking about. He's giving the odds of a randomness creating what we see from first cell, and he's
Now,
actually
explain-
giving you. He's
now-
actually giving you the first cell.
Right.
That's
but
a big
you'll
gift.
notice that Hoyle
That's a huge
doesn't
gift.
say that. Doesn't say what you're saying, that the chance of a God is the opposite. He doesn't say that, does he?
I think it's important
Well, I have to read more on it.
to differentiate between this claim we hear all the time about random collections and so forth. Just like with the funnel, water doesn't randomly collect at the bottom of the funnel. Liquids don't randomly collect, right? That's the forces of nature, the forces of physics, the laws of physics acting on material, right? Material funnels around, it goes to the bottom. It doesn't
Gravity.
randomly collect, right? Okay, so we've noticed that whenever solar systems or stars or things, supernova, black hole, they blow up, they tend to, great video from the space station, they'll take milk and they'll run it out like this, and it clumps into balls, right? Clumps into spheres, balls,
I've heard
right?
something about
So
that milk thing.
On
I
a
have to look
much
that up.
on a much larger scale, if you have a bunch of mass, a bunch of material, and it kind of in a plasma sense wraps itself around and gets dumped out for however this happens in the universe, in space where there is no gravity, where there's no direct gravity putting on it. There's some always around it all the time. It tends to mass together in balls, and that's what we see. We see the moon, we see the sun, we see the stars. They're all almost oblate spheroid. The Earth is actually pear-shaped. They're almost spherical.
Spherical, though, yeah.
Perfectly spherical.
That's what they have to be.
So
Right.
it's not perfectly random how the Earth happens to be almost a sphere. In the same way, it's not perfectly random how water happens to end up at the bottom of a funnel. It's the laws of physics acting on material. In the same way, it's not random when an environment selects an attribute like white stripes on a tiger in the Himalayas. It's not random. The environment is not selected. The environment is what it is. It's cold in that environment. And if the tiger wants to chase his prey, he's going to have a selected advantage in his genes that favor white stripes or white fur and black stripes, as opposed to being in the jungles in the Bengali, right? So
And me and you would agree on that part, Eric.
it's not awesome, and it's not random. It's selected by the environment. Now, the word random really gets abused here desperately, and I hope to fix this. I'm not going to, obviously, in one conversation, but the randomness element comes in specifically in the genetic mutations. You have anywhere, depending on where you read, anywhere between 60 and 600 mutations, genetic mutations that neither of your parents had. And horizontal stripes and vertical stripes make diagonal stripes, right? Okay, in a very broad sense, right? So on those diagonal stripes, when you get them from your dad's vertical and your mom's horizontal, you get diagonal. On those patterns, they don't always come out perfectly, right? They come out with variations, and those variations, the ones that are selected, are randomly selected. So people hear this word random, and they just run with it. They go, oh, it's random. Everything in the universe is random. No, it's the laws of physics acting on material in the same way the funnel, in the same way the planets, in the same way all these other things. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
So this word random really gets extra legs and extra mileage out of it. That's not quite the claim.
Okay. So let me comment on the stuff you were talking about, in particular about the tiger thing. Me and you agree on that part.
Follow.
And we've said that many times.
I know.
The
macro, micro.
Right. Micro
species
stuff.
migration event is what I wrote down on my notes.
Cross-species migration.
Cross-species
That's
migration.
where we
beautiful.
differ.
And I have a topic.
As far as what you're talking about with the tiger, I use a polar bear example, but same thing. The environment picked out the trait that was existent in the polar bear, thick fur, white, so he could sneak up on his prey better and mate with another white polar bear female that does the same thing. So, and they produce little white bears that are going to do the same thing. So those type of things.
Don't get blue.
Have no disagreement on that. That stuff is observable. It happens, and we observe it, and there's no cognitive distance for that because there's no mechanical problems with it. That's easy enough. The information's there. Evolution, if you want to call it that, is going to kill off what doesn't adapt.
Right. Okay.
The
so
short-haired bear, the panda bear, for example, is not going to get along well in the North Pole.
Right.
He's going to die.
So
first of all, there's no bamboo there for him to eat.
We're kind of going around the same pole here over and over
Okay,
again.
so that part I agree. But here's the thing. Let me just address this. You started talking about the laws of physics and acting on bodies, but you're jumping from here over to where Scott's sitting. The laws of physics is just man's description, what we call the laws of physics, the law of gravity. All that is man's description of bodies acting on each other.
Well, in a Newtonian sense.
Okay, but that's bodies acting on each other.
In a Newtonian sense only.
That's fine. But here's my point. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about before there were bodies to act upon. The 0 point.
Planck time.
Yeah, the idea, and again, I don't agree with the Big Bang, but just assume for a second. Everything's moving back, and it moved back to a singularity. The singularity is then before that. None of that, the laws of physics, like whatever the scientist was, and I'm not going to mention any scientists' names. I don't want to get beat over the head anymore. But there's many that say the laws of physics can produce what we see. Well, I'm sorry, they don't. The law of physics can't move this pen right here to over there. Because the law of physics, all it is a description of what is going on with bodies that are already here. So the law of gravity has no purpose prior to the bodies being here for it to act upon. This law of physics, law of gravity, cannot move this pen right here to right there. Can't do it. Because it's just a description the humans made of it. All it is an evaluation of things that are already existent, acting upon each other. I'll grant you that. It does work. But that doesn't describe how those bodies got here in the first place. It has no bearing on that.
If those words even have any meaning, because before the Planck time, we can't say things exist or didn't exist because we don't have any way to measure. We torture the word beginning all the time too. It's really more of kind of the end of our ability to describe, right? If we're going backwards in time and
Sure,
kind of putting
but that's
the universe in reverse,
what and I will reference Hawking on this one, not get beat up. Hawking and whatever his buddy was.
Doesn't matter. Kip Thorne.
Yeah. They both describe time, energy, matter, time, and space having a beginning. And at that point, then you have no law of gravity. You have no law of physics. You have nothing.
To your point, they say
Yeah.
the laws of physics were created at the Planck time.
Well, gravity was, that force came into existence, but for that force to describe things before that, it has no ability to do that.
Okay, so you talked to this analogy kind of has a broader scope here. You talked about the pen getting from here to making a leap from there to here, laws of physics to where we are now. Right?
Gravity moving it. Yeah.
Okay, so this was mentioned to you in the third, and I don't want to tread over ground that was in the third session as well. This was mentioned to you, and I agree with you. I didn't really love the analogy, but it's like you said, it was incomplete. It's like saying I believe in micro but not macro, or to say I understand or accept the existence of the models of the physical of the laws of physics, but I don't see how they got us to here. It's like saying, yes, I understand how they operate. Yes, I understand they're fundamental, but I only agree. I understand or I accept inches or millimeters, but not light years, right? Because inches add up to, if you have enough inches over time, it adds up to light years. If you have enough mother to father or father to son, father to son, father to son, generational gaps over and over again, it adds up to species migration events over a long enough period of time, which is the model of, and I'm not making an argument from populism, which is the model of 99.9% of all science that's being taught in the biological sphere right now, right?
Okay, but Eric, when you talk about inches to feet,
I didn't say feet. Feet was what you said in the third
yards.
one. I said light years.
Light years, okay.
Yeah, which is much longer than feet.
I agree. But you're introducing into supposed nothingness space. Again,
I will happily admit I can't explain the
matter,
explain
energy, space, and time at
Yeah.
the beginning, and that idea of measurement with what's the inch to the light year, that's inside space.
Our current
about
understanding of this version of the universe is easy to describe in a poetic way as having a
Hey
beginning.
guys,
Yes,
we need to wrap
we
up.
need to stop.
Sure.
And I look
I
forward
can't-
to the
We can't fight anymore.
origin of the universe
I'm glad it's not a
episode.
fight because he's a lot bigger than I am. I'm going to lose.
I would never hurt you. I'm a pacifist.
Okay.